And my head's back in a box, Saturday, July 6th, 2019, 8:43 p.m. My name is Kessie Anderson, and we're back to the party that is not. This is Heresiarch.
Heresiarch. Heresy. An originator or chief advocate of a heresy. Heresiarch. Heresiarch. French heretic, the ecclesiastical Latin from Greek hereticos, able to choose.
Now, something just rubbed me the wrong way when I was studying the Torah and the Tanakh, which is the Bible of the Jewish people. How they were able to take the Pentateuch, or the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, that's in the blue, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and how they were able to get 6,200 pages out of that. Now, that's kind of the smokescreen that we've been fed, but that's not the way it works. Those 5 books equal 176 pages in an Old Testament King James Version edition. So you have 1,400 years of rabbis discussing and debating, and they get the 6,200-page Babylonian or Jerusalem Talmud. 6,200 pages is the Babylonian Talmud. Now, that just does not ring true to me, so I looked into it a little bit further to figure out where all of this could have come from. Parts of it do come from the Torah. A lot of it has to go back to when Moses was on Mount Sinai. So let's jump into that a little bit further. So when Moses went up to Mount Sinai the first time, he was given set of tablets number 1 by God. Those were the ones that Moses dashed on the ground. That's where they say the 7 Noahide laws came from. The second set of tablets are the ones that he created that God told him to make, and that's the Decalogue, that's the 10 Commandments. Now the question, how many times did Moses go up to Mount Sinai? Moses actually went up on Mount Sinai several times to meet God, as recorded in Exodus 19 through the end of the book. Depending on the reckoning, Moses climbed Mount Sinai about 8 times to meet with the Lord. The first ascent, 3 months after the Exodus of Egypt, the Israelites arrived at Mount Sinai. Moses' first trip up Mount Sinai is described in Exodus 19, 2 through 7. He ascends the mountain in verse 3 and comes back down in verse 7. On the mountain, God tells Moses that he is offering a covenant to the people of Israel. If they will keep the covenant, God will make them his own treasured possession and a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, verses 5 and 6. Moses reports this message to the people, and the people respond by saying, "We will do everything the Lord has said," Exodus 19:8. Now the second ascent, Moses returns to the top of Mount Sinai in Exodus 19:8 in order to relay the people's response to the offer of a covenant. God then tells Moses that he will speak audibly to Moses in a thick cloud so that all the people will put their trust in Moses as God's chosen leader. Moses descends the mountain in verse 9 in order to relay this information to the children of Israel. Now the third ascent in Exodus 19:10, God is speaking to Moses again. This implies that Moses may have again climbed Mount Sinai. Some scholars believe God's words in verse 10 were part of the discourse in verse 9. In any case, Moses is said to descend the mountain again in verse 14. Moses consecrates the people in preparation for the Lord's appearance on the mountain on the 3rd day, verses 10 and 11. On the 3rd day there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, Exodus 19:16. The people of Israel were understandably frightened. Then Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, verses 18 and 19. Now the fourth ascent, Moses' fourth trip up Mount Sinai, is described, Exodus 19, 20 through 25. God summons Moses to the top of the mountain in order to have him warn the people not to draw near the mountain while his presence is on Sinai. He also tells Moses to bring his brother Aaron up the mountain with him. Moses descends the mountain in verse 25. God then delivers the 10 Commandments audibly in Exodus 20, 1 through 17. In fear, the people of Israel plead with Moses not to let God speak directly to them. Instead, Instead, they ask Moses to be their intercessor, and they would listen to him, verses 18 and 19. Moses tells them to not be afraid, but that God is testing them, so that they would fear him and not sin, verse 20. Now the fifth ascent. Moses returns to Mount Sinai in Exodus 20:21 as he approached the thick darkness where God was. At this time, God gives Moses various laws recorded in chapters 21 through 23, along with a promise to give the land of Canaan to the children of Israel, Exodus 23:20 through 33. The sixth ascent in Exodus 24:1, Moses is summoned again to climb Mount Sinai. This time he's to bring Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel with him. The next morning Moses built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Verse 4, he offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings and read the book of the covenant to the people, who responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said, we will obey." Verse 7. To ratify the covenant, Moses sprinkled the people with the blood of the sacrifice. Verse 8. After the ceremony, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the elders ascend the mountain, and there they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as bright blue as the sky. Exodus 24:10. Amazingly, God allows these men to live, even though they had seen God. In fact, they ate and drank on the mountain. Verse 11. God then commands Moses to continue up Sinai in order to receive the stone tablets that God had prepared. Exodus 24:12. Moses takes Joshua with him and sends the others down to the foot of the Sinai. While Joshua waits, Moses continues the ascent. For 6 days a cloud covers the top of the mountain. On the 7th day, God calls Moses to enter the cloud and approach the top of the mountain. Moses stays there for 40 days and 40 nights. That's verse 18. During this meeting on the mountain, God gives Moses much information. This included the 10 Commandments written on tablets of stone by God himself. That's the Noahide law. Moses also receives complete instructions on how to build the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, and the altar, specifications of the priestly garments, etc. Exodus 24 through 31. Unfortunately, at the foot of the mountain, the Israelites had Aaron build the golden calf and were committing idolatry. When Moses and Joshua descend the mountain, Exodus 32:19, and see what the people are doing, Moses breaks the stone tablets in anger. He then destroys the golden calf and disciplines the people. Yeah, by discipline, estimated 3,000 dead. The 7th ascent, Moses goes back to the Lord in Exodus 32:32 in order to intercede on behalf of the children of Israel. This implies another ascent of Sinai in a show of great love and mercy that anticipates the love and mercy of Jesus Christ. Moses offers his own life in exchange of the life of Israel. Verse 32. Now you got to understand, this commentary is written by a Christian. Jews would not accept that foreshadowing, type and shadow of Moses being the Christ role as an intercessor. The 8th ascent in Exodus 34, 1 through 2, the Lord says to Moses, "Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets which you broke." All right, gonna stop right there. That to me means that the first tablets held the same information as these tablets. Right there. Now, according to Chabad Lubavitch and other Jews, they do not accept that. Interesting. Now let's continue. "Be ready in the morning and then come up on Mount Sinai. Present yourself to me there on top of the mountain." Moses is to come alone. On top of the mountain, the Lord reveals himself to Moses and describes himself this way: the Lord, the compassionate and gracious, God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Verse 6. Moses worships the Lord and receives a repetition of the covenant, which he writes on the stone tablets. Moses is on Sinai for another 40 days and 40 nights. Miraculously, without eating bread or drinking water. Verse 28. When Moses comes back down to the people, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. Verses 29 and 30. The events at Mount Sinai were monumental in the history of the world. God was creating for himself a new nation with new laws and a new way of life. The Lord showed himself to be a God who desires to communicate himself and to forge a relationship with his people. In giving the law, God revealed his holiness, clearly defined sin, Romans 7:7, if you want to go into the New Testament, which Judaism will not accept, and provided a guardian to eventually bring us to Christ, Galatians 3:24-25. The meditation of Moses on Sinai is a wonderful picture of the intercession of Christ on behalf of sinners, Romans 8-34 again. This is a Christian who wrote this out. It is gotquestions.org, Moses on Mount Sinai.html. So, on estimate total, Moses spends approximately 85 days minimum in Mount Sinai. That's overall, not consecutively. Now, he's given a lot of information from God. But what extra information was given to him? Now, we have to understand the Talmud is the oral Torah. So when Moses was in Egypt and he performed his miracles against Pharaoh, whatever took place in Egypt, there was way more than what we've been let onto. Now, that's where a big dose of the Jewish mysticism comes from. Remember when Moses had his snake take out the Pharaoh's priests' snakes? Well, guess what? Apparently, the Pharaoh's priests, occultists, whatever you want to call them, they had power. They were able to make a snake just as much as Moses was able to make a snake. So whatever tech, whatever they had going on, if we acquiesce that this is a true event, there was more going on than just was written down in our biblical narrative. So that is where this oral Torah comes from. That's where the Talmud comes from. That's where Jewish mysticism comes from. It's not the Torah per se. It's all the stuff that was handed down, the superstition, the stories your mom and dad tell you about Bigfoot, or whatever else in your family are the family secrets that are handed down from father to son, generation to generation. It didn't take that long to get the tablets. So what was going on the other 80 plus days that Moses was up there? He was given a lot of extra information that I outlined, but there's way more that was given. That's where the 6,200 pages extra comes from. That is exegesis. That is outside of biblical narrative. That's what is handed down from father to son amongst them, and then they finally wrote it down, and that's where the Talmud itself comes from. So there's a whole lot of extra information that they know that we don't. For example, one example in Mormonism. You can be an average weekly going Mormon your entire life. Pay your tithing, go to church, spend your now 2 hours in Sunday every week. But if you do not qualify to go to the Mormon temple, you will have no clue what goes on in that Mormon temple. None. Zero. Even when you go to a temple prep class, they are very vague on what you actually do until you go through it. Now, the Mormon temple has been edited and changed hundreds of times. So even when you go then at that point, you do not know what has all been edited or changed. Now, you can find it now because of technology and people have filmed what's gone on inside of the Mormon temple. But remove all that, you really would not know. Same with Judaism. How much information do you as an outsider actually know that they teach? I would argue you know less than 5% of what goes on and what they actually teach in their quiet moments, in their quiet whisperings amongst themselves. On Mission of Israel to the UN in Geneva, embassies.gov.il, there's Jewish sacred texts that they have outlined here. Of course, you have the Torah. Then you have what they use the word the Bible, even though to them it's the Tanakh, which is Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, which even then it's not Old Testament because that means that they would have to accept a new one. You can't do that because that means you accept Christ and they do not. And then you have commentaries on the canon. So just like you have pastors, preachers, scholars, etc. that go through the Bible and have written a bazillion different commentaries about a bazillion different opinions, about a bazillion different doctrines, cultural, etc., you have that with the Talmud and the Torah as well. Then you get into the oral law. Now that's the stuff that's extracurricular. Yeah, they'll bring up some of the Old Testament, but they'll also bring in their extra information that if you don't speak Aramaic or Hebrew, you're probably not going to know. Then you have your commentaries on that. Then you have a halakhic literature, which is legal literature going over the laws of the Torah. Then you have your responses where people have asked questions. They've tried to form a catalog based on the response. And you have the codes. And then one of the major works they go to is Maimonides. Now, there's a lot about him I could get into, but I will not. Now you get into mysticism, which is Kabbalah. So in my previous videos, I mentioned there were over 1,000 different, over 1,000 plus different commentaries, books. Who knows what is actually out there that they teach? There's a lot of doctrines that we have no clue what they believe and what they stand for. Now, Kabbalah, from the Hebrew lekabel, to receive, signifying knowledge handed down by tradition. So this is the whisperings, this is the stuff that they talk about from father to son, that you, the non-believer, the goyim, the Gentile, does not have access to, and you're not supposed to. So the main work in Kabbalah is Zohar, means splendor. It's a body of literature including exegetical statements, homilies, and eclectic discussions that parallel the weekly Torah portions in the first part of the Song of Songs. While Kabbalistic tradition traces the Zohar to the Mishnaic sage Rabbi Simeon Bar Yochai and his associates, modern literary scholarship places its authorship in the 13th century when it became known, and credits its authorship to Moses ben Shem Tov de Leon in Guadalajara, northeast of Madrid. Several generations after the Zohar came to be known, it sparked a renewal in the development of Kabbalah in Spain, including a profusion of commentaries. The expulsion of Jews from Spain, 1492, infused Kabbalah with messianic and apocalyptic trends and expanded its sphere of influence to Italy, northern Africa, Turkey, and land of Israel. From there, it spread to Poland and Lithuania, where it also influenced the Hasidic movement, which is sometimes described as applied Kabbalah. So these, the ultra-Orthodox, the Chabad Lubavitch, these are the guys that really, really buy this stuff. And this has influenced a ton of Hollywood film, a whole bunch of our news, a whole bunch of our trends that are going on is based on the Noahide law. When I really hope to get into the lessons that they taught. I'm going to do that in the next video. I just really wanted to come back here and touch upon the Torah and the Talmud, and how the Talmud and the oral Torah, which is the Talmud, are the real doctrines, the Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism, all this extracurricular stuff that would technically be out of bounds for a Christian believer to believe in. Unfortunately, because they have legislated the Noahide laws into the legal code, we have to take this stuff serious. We have to get people to pay attention and look into it. It will blow your mind what's going on with the laws and how they're positioning themselves, using the rainbow flag. Who else uses the rainbow flag? Why are they pushing all this extra stuff onto us, this cultural Marxism? It's all based on the Noahide laws, and it's all based on a deep dive in each one of the Noahide laws. For example, their first commandment is the oneness of God. If you are a triune believer, which usually is evangelical or even Catholic when you believe in the Trinity, that's blasphemy. Why? Because it's not the oneness of God. You are breaking God into three. Sounds technical, but that's how these people work. Technicalities are the way that the Pharisees reign. That's how they judge. That's how they analyze. Technicalities on everything. Pedantic. It gets to the borderline ridiculous, and that is how we are being judged. Anytime you're censored online, guess where that AI came from? ADL, SPLC, ACLU? What do you think they're doing when Benjamin Netanyahu brings all of our tech companies into Israel to have not just research centers, major research centers? We are punching 200 times above our weight. Not 10, not 20, 200 times. So listen to some of what Benjamin Netanyahu says. He is positioning Israel to be a digital titan, a powerhouse of tech, and it is because of these Noahide laws. The only thing stopping them now is the United Nations, and Israel is making a huge move to get the UN into Israel. So they've already got the Noahide laws into our legal code in 1991. 2018, every governor recognized the Noahide laws, so now they're just sitting as an asset on the legal battlefield. Now you have Rick DeSantis, or Ron DeSantis in Florida, who just passed an anti-Semitism bill. They are putting these things in place in advance and on purpose because they are preparing for something, and it is the 2030 agenda. We're going to go into that as well in later videos. So be very wary of what's coming up. I wouldn't push this so hard, but I would push against Catholics. I'd push against Protestants, Christians, you name it, if they were doing the same thing, but I'm not seeing that trend so much. It is this group, the Chabad Lubavitchers, as well as a lot of parts of Judaism, that are pushing this extremist theology into legalese. They're also pushing the degeneracy and the terrible divisions amongst all of us, and that is to get us ready for judgment. And I'm going to go into that further. All of this is laid out in these 7 Noahide laws. It is unbelievable when you deep dive into each one, and that's what I'm going to do starting on my next video. For sure, I'm going to finally jump into these Noahide laws. So thank you for joining me again. I'm going to stop right here. Until next time.